That's not up for debate. But this is where the paradox begins, because a clinical trial from the University of Bath proves something really disturbing.
Drinking strong black coffee before breakfast raises your glucose response by half. Same coffee, same breakfast. The only difference is a simple timing mistake that millions of us are making every single morning. So today, I'm going to show you the exact cellular mechanism, how caffeine literally closes the doors that let glucose into your muscles. And by the end of this, I'll show you how to stack this simple fix with the food order trick we've talked about to create a double layer of glucose protection for free. Okay, here's our roadmap. We're going to start with that shocking 50% spike. Then we'll get into what caffeine is doing to your cells. We'll solve that coffee paradox. I'll give you the 5-minute fix. We'll cover the 4 most common mistakes, and we'll finish with your double protection plan. So let's get right into the science. This isn't just a theory. This all comes from a super carefully controlled clinical trial at the University of Bath. The researchers, they wanted to know one really simple thing. How does a single cup of strong black coffee consumed before you eat breakfast, how does that affect your blood sugar? Well, the results were pretty staggering, and this chart says it all. When people had breakfast by itself, they got a normal, predictable glucose response. But when they had the exact same breakfast just after drinking black coffee, their blood sugar spike was about 50% higher. Now you're probably thinking, wait a minute, I've been doing this for years. So let's look at exactly how they proved it. So here's what they did. They took 29 healthy people and put them through 3 scenarios. First, a normal night's sleep, then a sugary breakfast, glucose response totally normal. Second, a rough night of sleep. They actually woke them up every hour, followed by the same breakfast. And here's what's interesting. A bad night's sleep alone didn't really mess with their glucose control. But then came the third scenario. After that same bad night of sleep, they gave them strong black coffee before breakfast, and boom, a 50% higher glucose spike. This tells us it wasn't the bad sleep, it was the coffee timing. So the big question is why? Why does this happen? What is caffeine actually doing inside your body to cause this massive glucose traffic jam? Well, here's where it gets really interesting. At the cellular level, it's basically a 3-step cellular shutdown. It all starts with a surge of epinephrine, which leads to something called an adenosine blockade, and the result is a huge drop in your body's ability to get rid of that glucose. Okay, mechanism 1. When you drink that coffee on an empty stomach, caffeine pokes your adrenal glands, telling them to release epinephrine. Yup, that's adrenaline. It's your fight-or-flight hormone. And adrenaline sends a powerful signal to your muscle cells that basically says, hey, stop absorbing glucose. We might need that energy to run from a tiger. It's preparing your body for a crisis, not for digesting your breakfast. Then there's mechanism 2. Caffeine also blocks these things called adenosine receptors. Now, adenosine is a good guy here. It normally helps your cells take in glucose by keeping these little cellular doors called GLUT4 transporters wide open. So when caffeine comes along and blocks adenosine, it's literally like it puts a padlock on those doors. All the glucose from your breakfast is now stuck in your bloodstream with nowhere to go. And if you need the smoking gun, here it is. Another study did something brilliant. They gave people caffeine, and sure enough, they got that glucose spike. But then they gave them caffeine plus a beta blocker, which is a common medication that blocks the effects of adrenaline. The result? The glucose spike completely vanished. This proves it. Caffeine's short-term damage is almost entirely driven by that adrenaline surge. Okay, and this is where most people get confused, because all the long-term data says the exact opposite. So how can the same drink be so good for you over years, but create this big glucose spike this morning?
So, let's break down this paradox. On one side, we have years of data showing coffee helps prevent diabetes. On the other, we have a single cup spiking your blood sugar by 50%. The key to understanding this is realizing that coffee and caffeine are not the same thing. See, coffee has hundreds of amazing compounds besides caffeine, things like chlorogenic acid, polyphenols, magnesium. These compounds work slowly over months and years, building up your insulin sensitivity. But caffeine, it creates that adrenaline surge and spikes your glucose in a matter of minutes. It's just a case of different compounds working on completely different timescales. And here is the final piece of the puzzle. Studies show that decaf coffee gives you the exact same long-term protection against diabetes as regular coffee does. This proves it's all those other compounds, not the caffeine, that are the long-term heroes. So with decaf, you get all the long-term good stuff without any of the short-term glucose chaos. So, should you quit coffee? Absolutely not. The long-term benefits are way too good to pass up. Here's what you do instead. This is the coffee timing protocol. Okay, rule number 1 is the most important. Eat first, drink second. Period. We'll get into why in a sec, but there are other great tips. Number 2, try to wait about 90 minutes after you wake up to have that first cup. 3, if you absolutely have to drink coffee first, add some protein or fat to it to blunt the effect. 4, think about making your very first cup of the day decaf. And that 5th rule, stacking that one so powerful it gets its own finale. Here's the key takeaway. Food acts as a shield. When you eat something, even just a handful of almonds or a bite of an egg before your coffee, it gets your metabolism ready. The protein and fiber slow everything down and basically stop caffeine's ability to spike your glucose. Having food in your system first is like a buffer for the entire effect. All right, let's quickly run through the most common mistakes this whole protocol helps you avoid. Because honestly, millions of us are making these errors every single day. Mistake 1, black coffee on a totally empty stomach. That is the absolute worst case scenario. Mistake 2, drinking coffee the second your eyes open. Your stress hormone, cortisol, is already at its peak then, which also raises blood sugar. Adding caffeine on top of that is just a double whammy. Mistake 3 is believing that just because coffee is healthy long-term, the timing doesn't matter short-term. And finally, mistake 4, ignoring that caffeine spikes your blood pressure too. It's just an unnecessary stress on your system. Okay, so you know how to dodge the big coffee mistakes, but we can take this a step further. This is where we put it all together. If you saw our explainer on food order, you might remember how just eating your carbs last can drop your blood sugar by 44%. So what happens when we add this coffee timing trick right on top of that? You stack both strategies. It's that simple. You get double protection. You start your meal with veggies and protein, then you have your carbs. Then, after your meal, you have your coffee. 2 totally free changes. Food order plus coffee timing, and your entire morning glucose curve transforms. No meds, no restrictions, just a different sequence. Now, if you haven't seen how rearranging the order you eat your meal dropped blood sugar by 44% in a clinical trial, that's the explainer to watch next. Everything I just showed you stacks directly on top of it.